Going 7 days without sleep is a clinical emergency. It triggers a systemic collapse of biological machinery, moving far beyond mere exhaustion into dangerous physiological dysfunction. Within the first 24 hours of sleep deprivation, the brain begins to falter. Cognitive impairment becomes measurable, mirroring the effects of a blood alcohol content between 0.05 and 0.1%. Simple physical tasks demonstrate this decline. Reaction times slow significantly, making activities that require rapid coordination, like catching a falling object, increasingly difficult. Beyond physical coordination, the mind struggles to regulate emotions. Irritability often flares, while short term memory lapses emerge, marking the start of a systemic cognitive retreat. During wakefulness, learning strengthens synapses. This process is called long term potentiation. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis posits that sleep is mandatory to downscale these synapses. Without this period of rest, the brain reaches a point of synaptic saturation. This results in neural noise, which effectively drowns out coherent thought. By day 7, your brain is physically unable to differentiate signal from noise. By day 2 of sleep deprivation, the brain's waste clearance mechanism, known as the glymphatic system, begins to fail. Without restorative sleep, neurotoxic proteins like beta amyloid accumulate in the interstitial spaces between neurons. This accumulation triggers localized neural inflammation, marking the transition from simple tiredness to early physiological distress. As exhaustion peaks, your brain forces a survival mechanism, the microsleep. These are involuntary blackouts lasting between 2 and 30 seconds. You are effectively offline, yet your body remains in motion. You are no longer in control. By the 72-hour mark, the brain struggles to maintain a stable perception of the world. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to dissolve, forcing REM sleep cycles into your waking hours. Visual and auditory hallucinations emerge as the brain attempts to force restorative dreaming patterns into a conscious waking state. Reality becomes fragmented, leading to severe dissociation. The brain's processing of environmental stimuli becomes distorted, much like a failing electrical signal. The hallucinatory phase represents a critical neurological shift. Because the brain is starved for REM sleep, it begins to force dream state activity into your waking awareness. In this state, external reality blends with internal imagery. Objects might distort, or voices may emerge from static, as your executive control over sensory processing fails entirely. By day 4, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's command center for executive function, begins to fail. This region is critical for reasoning, decision-making, and controlling impulses. As the neurological connection degrades, the ability to plan rationally vanishes. Decisions become erratic, and basic impulse control effectively shuts down, leaving the mind in a state of cognitive breakdown. Without restorative sleep, the brain is no longer capable of complex thought, pushing the subject into a dangerous state of executive failure. By day 5 of sleep deprivation, the brain undergoes a radical physiological shift. Blood flow is shunted away from the prefrontal cortex, our center for logic and executive control, and redirected toward the amygdala. This redirection makes the brain hyperreactive to perceived threats. You experience intense aggression, irrational paranoia, and a total collapse of mood stability. Neuroimaging reveals that the amygdala becomes overactive, effectively drowning out rational thought. This biological crisis renders the individual emotionally unpredictable and physically dangerous to themselves. By day 7, your heart's ability to recover is severely compromised. Heart rate variability, a key indicator of cardiovascular health, drops significantly, signaling immense strain on the autonomic nervous system. Systemic inflammation markers like C-reactive protein spike by 300%. This indicates widespread stress in the body, essentially putting your cardiovascular system in a state of crisis. This chronic stress drastically increases the risk of inflammatory conditions like myocarditis or pericarditis, as the body struggles to maintain homeostasis under constant physiological duress. By day 6, the human body enters a state of near total physiological collapse. The immune system, starved of its essential repair cycles, begins to lose its ability to defend against pathogens. Simultaneously, the cardiovascular system is under extreme duress. Heart rate variability drops to critical levels, and the risk of acute hypertension and sudden cardiac arrhythmias spikes sharply. The body is no longer maintaining homeostasis. It is operating on the ragged edge of systemic failure. By the third day without sleep, the brain enters a state of functional psychosis. At this point, the connection to reality is severed, and cognitive processing becomes chaotic and fragmented. Specialists categorize this as a clinical emergency. Logical thinking is replaced by irrationality, and the brain can no longer integrate sensory data into a coherent worldview. At the 7-day mark, the risk of sepsis becomes a critical concern. Animal models demonstrate that deprivation leading to 10 to 14 days is often fatal, primarily due to the total collapse of the immune system. By the 7th day, the body is no longer simply tired. It is experiencing severe failures in basic cellular repair. This lack of restorative processing prevents the immune system from identifying and neutralizing pathogens effectively. This state mimics the progression of sepsis, where a localized infection or systemic failure leads to inflammatory shock. Without sleep, our biological defenses essentially disarm. Many seek to replace sleep with stimulants or experimental compounds. However, science reveals that no drug can safely replicate the complex restorative molecular dance of natural NREM and REM cycles. Natural sleep requires the synchronized firing of billions of neurons and active waste clearance via the glymphatic system. Such precise biological orchestration remains beyond the reach of pharmacology. Studies indicate that the neurological damage caused by a full week of total sleep deprivation can be profound and potentially long-lasting. Memory consolidation centers like the hippocampus are often permanently impacted. High-resolution imaging shows decreased encoding activity in the brain's primary memory hubs, showing the physical toll of lost sleep. The most famous case of total sleep deprivation occurred in 1964, when 17-year-old Randy Gardner stayed awake for 264 hours, a total of 11 days. While Gardner survived the experiment, neurological follow-ups decades later revealed that he suffered from persistent cognitive and neurological deficits, proving that survival is not equivalent to safety. It is a critical mistake to think that missing just a few hours of sleep per night is harmless. This slow burn deprivation, where one averages 5 to 6 hours of sleep for a week, triggers cumulative neurological damage similar to short-term total sleep loss. Workplace fatigue and impaired alertness are immediate consequences. Studies show that even moderate sleep debt significantly elevates the risk of fatal vehicle crashes and performance errors equivalent to alcohol intoxication. Furthermore, the physiological impact is systemic. From memory consolidation deficits to weakened immune responses and cardiovascular strain, the body effectively enters a state of chronic repair failure. Never underestimate the power of consistent, sufficient sleep. Your biological systems rely on these nightly cycles to function. Sleep is far more than mere resting. It is a mandatory biological repair process that our bodies cannot forgo. During this time, the brain actively clears out neurotoxic waste products accumulated throughout the day. Simultaneously, the brain resets and downscales synaptic connections, preventing neural saturation. Finally, sleep regulates every major organ system, ensuring the body remains functional and resilient. Over a period of 7 days, the body undergoes a predictable and dangerous transformation from exhaustion to total system failure. In the first 2 days, the primary impact is cognitive. You experience significant impairment, memory lapses, and delayed reaction times, mirroring early stages of intoxication. By days 3 and 4, the brain begins to force sleep cycles into wakefulness, causing auditory and visual hallucinations and extreme fragmentation of thought. By the final phase, days 5 through 7, the subject enters a state of functional psychosis. The body suffers systemic inflammatory responses, cardiovascular strain, and the risk of catastrophic organ collapse. This week-long period is not merely a challenge of endurance. It is a clinical emergency that pushes human physiology toward the brink of collapse. In conclusion, prioritizing sleep is not just about feeling rested. It is essential for your survival. Sleep is a fundamental biological requirement that allows for cellular repair and cognitive preservation. 7 days without sleep is a reckless gamble with your own biology. Respect your limits. Prioritize your rest.